with the bag, you can do a reveal. Very dramatic.
Drum roll.
You ready?
Wow. I want to start off this interview with a question for you.
Yes.
And kind of a broad, open question. And obviously your career has a lot to do with creativity and ingenuity in general. So I just wanted to know your perspective on how important that is in a career, because someone like me is a student who's graduating, many considerations when you're taking into account what you want to do for the rest of your life. But something I found that's kind of a through line through everything is when I'm being creative in my job and I feel like I'm being fulfilled that way, it's something that I want to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think as a kid, I was always into things. I mean, I guess we would call it creativity if you wanted to take something apart to find out how it worked. I used to do that a lot, not necessarily be able to put them back together again, but everything I did, and I wasn't an only child. I had a sister who's 13 years older than me, but that meant basically I was an only child. By the time I was 5, 6 years old, she was almost married. So I had to make my own, I guess I had to make my own way, because my mother and father both worked. And so I had to look after myself, even as far as cooking myself something to eat when I got home from school, or just doing things that I wanted to do. I had that opportunity, which was good because I didn't have to deal with other siblings or anything like that. So it allowed me freedom to be creative. And I remember, it may not be relevant, but I remember a turning point for me was I must have been 10 or 11 years old, maybe younger, sick. I had a cold or something like that, and an uncle gave me a book to read. And I would read, but not by choice necessarily. But he bought me a book to read, which was called Carter on Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, or Princess of Mars. And it's the first book that I ever sat down and read from cover to cover in one sitting, because it was so fascinating. And you needed a vivid imagination, yes, to visualize it. But at the same time, the writing was so good, it wasn't that big of a problem. But it made me think outside the box that I was currently living in. Mm-hmm. And I also had an opportunity as a kid with some neighbors' kids who were older than I was, that would take me to what we had in England was a Saturday morning matinees, the movies for kids. And that was Superman, Flash Gordon, things like that. And that kind of must have lit something up inside of me, because I thought, how the hell do they do that sort of stuff? And that took me on to another good opportunity, because I was fairly good at art and had an excellent teacher at my secondary school, which was, I don't know what you call it, high school, I guess you call it here. Teacher that was a good art teacher, and suggested that myself and a good friend of mine should apply to go to art school. So we both applied, we both got in. I went into sort of industrial design, which again was thinking, and you're trying to design things and make things work. Peter went into graphic design and actually became a big wheel in designing packaging for a huge company called Sainsbury's in England. He was their head designer in the end. Unfortunately passed away from a brain tumor, but he was amazing. And it gave me the opportunity at art school again to be out of my working class situation and find there was bigger things out there. One of the teachers at that art school happened to be or happened to have a daughter who worked for an animation company. In those days it was all drawn animation and not computer animation. She was leaving to have a baby, and that had an opportunity they wanted to interview people that might want to get into animation. So I went for that interview. I think they said 300 people.
Wow.
And 4 of us got jobs as trainee animation directors. I knew pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be an animation director. I wasn't a good enough artist, because this was very, very, very photorealistic animation. which was, not beyond what I could do.
Like the early Disney movies, so that kind of stuff.
Even more than that. I mean, it was like they were doing government stuff. So it would be take a piece of equipment like an aqualung and then dissect it to show people how it worked and how to repair it. And so you had to make it look real, but you had to be able to take it apart as well. So I spent a year there and got involved with the community, and that actually got me in the union, which meant I could then apply for jobs. Because when I was looking for a job earlier, the catch-22 was you need to be in the union to get a job, and you need a job to get in the union.
Right.
So the breakthrough for that was you became a trainee, because somebody's moved up this gap at the bottom, and I got in as a trainee. So then I got in the union, went for a job actually on a movie called 2001: The Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
In the art department. Got the job. The producer gave me the job. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess the production designer was on vacation at the time. He got back on my first day at work. Said, "Who the hell are you?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, okay." And left the office, and 10 minutes later, the production manager come in and sacked me. He said, "I'm sorry, but evidently this job was meant for somebody's son or uncle or cousin or somebody else."
Really? So after you got hired, they took it away?
So I had a 2 weeks notice the day I started work. But it got me in the union. And then I kind of I went and worked for my brother-in-law and other people just to make some money. And finally, because every week I would get the union papers, the job list, and there was a job advertised for a special effects trainee on the Battle of Britain. This was 1967, I think. Again, like 200 people or something applied for it. 2 of us got the jobs. I was working for a gentleman called Glenn Robinson, an American effects guy, who ultimately won 5 Academy Awards. And that really changed my life. But I'd learned by that time that writers and directors come up with ideas that on the script it says one thing, but you have to mine their minds to find out exactly what they're expecting to see from you, and then you have to design it. Like, how do you make Superman fly? And I love that kind of a challenge. I've always liked that. My job, I felt and still feel in anything that I approach, is problem solving. So the director has a problem that he needs to, I blew up 5 cars in Condor Man, and how do you, where does he want to blow them up? How, he wanted one to blow up as it's taking off of the side of a mountain. You have to decide and design that and make sure that it's going to work for them. And those kind of things, I love to do that. And that's what, all of the movies that I've ever worked on have always required a hell of a lot of problem solving for not my problems, the director's problems or the producer's problems, because it's too expensive and they want to make it cheaper. But that was the challenge, and that was the creativity that I've got a very analytical mind. So if I see something, I usually want to know, how does it work, or how can, if it's broken, how can I fix it? And I mean, a stupid thing. We have which happened yesterday. We have a garbage disposal unit, and the plug that you put in the unit to make it work, the handle got broken on it. I think I must have dropped something on it, but it snapped off. I can't buy a new one because this is an older unit, and you can't get the spares for it anymore. So I've had to look at that and say, okay, how can I repair that and make it work again, and come up with the most sometimes unique way of doing something that you would never think possible. But if you think it through, you can make it work. And it's fascinating.
Interesting. So there's a creativity to the problem solving.
Absolutely.
That was a through line through your entire career.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's almost like an engineering mindset where you're faced with an issue.
Well, very much so.
Yeah.
And I think, being of special effects in my day was a combination of being a woodworker, a carpenter, an engineer, a plumber, an electrician, because you had to, but at the same time you had to use all of those things to help you get through whatever you were asked to do. I mean, that may have applied to using all of those disciplines to make something work. So that it's difficult to kind of pin down any one thing except a curiosity, I guess, and then finding out, not coming. I used to sort of sometimes stay awake for hours thinking about a problem that I was trying to solve, which may have been, not an important thing, but something that I got my mind thoughts on. How do I solve this problem? How do I get past it? And I still do that now.
And even when you were making movies, there's a much more tactile and in some ways real way that you had to deal with the issues. Because now you'll see, like, let's say to the Superman movies you helped out with. And nowadays, if you saw that, like even in the more recent ones, everyone knows in the back of their mind, okay, that's on a green screen, that's not real. Yeah. But when you watch the older ones, like the ones you worked on where you're flying over Niagara Falls and all the wires that you had to do with it, there's a certain tactile realness that you can see, oh, that guy's actually moving through that air in this shot.
Yeah, because, we, on Superman, for instance, the first one, I guess, which subsequently relayed to all of them, nobody could fly like Christopher. You could have a stuntman up there to do a rehearsal, but Chris was a pilot and he knew how to fly. I mean, when I say that, he knew how to act like he could fly.
Yeah.
And I remember when I came to Canada in 1979, I think it was, to do the Superman 2 sequence in Niagara Falls. We hadn't seen Christopher for 6 months because it was between Superman 1 and Superman 2. And we started shooting in Niagara Falls. So I came over with the crew to do the flying with Chris, and we had Lois going down the rapids and things like that. And the first day of shooting, Chris flew in the night before shooting started and actually took myself and my crew out for dinner at Mamma Mia's, Italian place, I still remember. And then the following day we were going to fly him where he takes off to save the kid over the falls. And we got the stunt guy on the wires to try to make sure the rig was working fine and everything was okay. And Chris came out and he had a bathrobe on over his outfit. And we sort of said, I said to him, you want to give it a try? He said, no, let's just shoot it. So he took, it must have been 300 or 400 people there watching as well, and he took the robe off, and we hooked him up, took the robe off, did the shot, and up in the air he went, and all the hairs on the back of my neck went up because he thought he could fly, and he looked like he could fly because he was so good with the guys that were flying him, my crew that was flying him. They had such a good rapport as to know his action, how they should react to his actions for taking off and landing, that it was amazing to watch him do these things. And it was a brilliant casting for Richard Donner to do.
Wow, I never even thought that it actually takes a certain person to know even how to fly with the wires, but that makes total sense. Yeah.
And one of the processes that we had was we had this arm that came through. We had a system called front screen projection, which is like this sort of silver reflective material you see on road signs and things like that. But you could project an image on it through a front surface mirror, which was on the same axis as the lens of the camera, and it would reflect back into the camera. So that be the background plates that Chris would be flying would be against that plate. So in order to fly him, we had a post about 4 inches, which would be 100 millimeters round. And there was a hydraulic gimbal on the end of it that he was attached to. And we could move him in various directions, which helped him because, as he would point out all the time, because he was a pilot, that no aircraft pretty much never flies perfectly straight. They're always reacting to the air and the winds and everything around them. So he knew how to make himself look like he was an aeroplane, or when I say an aeroplane, flying.
Yeah.
And those sort of slight things that maybe we don't notice, but they were there and made it look like a man could fly.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And I think those kinds of things, in movies now, they're as we were mentioning before, all green screen.
Yeah.
What do you think of the newer superhero movies, like the Marvels out there, and how they do things, just from compared to back in the day? It's different.
I think it was a amazing leap forward for movies and special effects.
Mm-hmm.
My only problem is it's sometimes overused to the extent where the effects take over from the actual storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there was movies like John Carter, and which my nephew did the effects on, or Lord of the Rings, that couldn't have been made without having computer animation and computer effects.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point of view, and I guess, what's his name? Peter Jackson, who directed those, used it perfectly to enhance the story, but the story was there, he had the story because of the Tolkien books, but he used that perfectly. There are other directors that tend to go overboard with it, and it doesn't. To me, it then if the effects become the star, then it's wasted, because that's not what it's all about. I mean, the fact that Christopher Reeve looked like he could fly, but it was still you were relating to Christopher as Superman and not, oh, that's a good effect, and who the hell is it on the wires, And I was telling the other guys I was talking to earlier that 2 or 3 years ago they asked me to judge the Student Academy Award nominations, and they sent me 14 movies, or 14 short movies, and I didn't like any of them. I didn't vote on any of them, and the reason was that none of them actually told any story. They were all trying to make effects that looked like effects. They would have some guy dressed in a motion capture suit, and they would relate that to some monster, and they would be leaping around and dancing for 14 minutes. So there was nothing to grab a hold of and say, oh, I mean, other than I was supposed to be judging the movies and not the effects. And none of them had anything going for them that would make me say, oh, that's got the potential to be a good director, because they weren't directing anything other than special effects.
So the way you see it is it's simply a tool. It's a tool to enhance the story.
Absolutely. That's all it should be. I mean, if you need it, use it. But if you don't need it, don't put it in there just because you can do it. And look how clever I am that I can do this. I mean, you're not clever anymore. I mean, another one, obviously a huge proponent of visual effects is Cameron, with what he's done with.
Yeah.
I mean, incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as they use it for that reason, to enhance the story. Again, you couldn't have done Avatar without computer.
I was just thinking that, yeah. So, and the first one was such a sensation. The second one was great too.
Yeah.
So.
And even things like sometimes you don't realize there are effects, and that's the best effects.
Like in The Social Network, the Winklevoss twins.
Yeah. Or you think of Titanic that Cameron did. They don't have the Titanic, but they had to make it look like the Titanic was there and they were on it. And every year, because I'm in the academy, I'm on the special effects section, and we get to view the movies, but also we get to view the 10 movies or so that are up for Academy Awards. We get the write-up or the video of the making of, as it were, and how they did the effects. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're fascinating to watch, even for me, as how they do things now. My nephew Neil got an Academy Award for Gravity.
Really?
Yeah. For the effects that he did flying, mostly, for flying like Sandra Bullock and the rest of the stars. Well, the rig that he built to do that, which was kind of a much advanced version of what we did on Superman, because Neil had worked with me on Superman, on one or either one or two of them. So, that to see that process, unfortunately, there's still a lot of use of practical effects. My other nephew, Chris, who has got an Academy Award for, I can't remember what it was for now. He's been the special effects director on the last 14 Bond movies.
Wow.
And they prefer to do physical effects than they do computer generated effects.
Yeah, especially with the kind of big stunts like that. There's something about it that I think is...
I remember, I forget the movie, but, he had to sink a whole building in Venice. I mean, that huge production.
And they did that.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Speaking of the kind of film environment, being on set, working with people like, I don't know, like the Superman movies through X-Men, as you mentioned before, 2001: Space Odyssey, why are there certain kind of stereotypes about film set environments that they can be a little bit harsh because of the pressures put on them? Have you yourself ever experienced that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm not quite sure why. I guess we've always had lawyers and accountants that run the movie business, and agents are generally lawyers as well, And when I started working in the business back in 67, 68 in England, we worked 8-hour days. And we had an hour for lunch, and we had 2 15-minute breaks for tea in the morning and tea in the afternoon, because you're English. But they got the movies made. And now, I mean, one of the reasons why I really didn't want to spend too much more time working in effects and in Canada was 14-hour days are usually the normal. And I don't care who you are. You get very tired, and in our case, you can get very loose, and it could be dangerous if you have to work that, and you only get, they say, oh, well, you've got 10 hours off the clock. You don't sleep 10 hours. By the time you get home and have something to eat and go to bed and get up, blah, 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 you've got 5 or 6 hours if you're lucky.
But people see these opportunities as their big break, and will do anything for it, and they won't complain.
Well, I don't know that. I certainly don't think that the movies have benefited from doing 14-hour days. There's obviously got to be an economic reason why they do that, but I don't know what it is, to be honest. I mean, maybe it's shorter production times or something like that. But some of the bigger movies, obviously, they take their time. They have to, because there's huge effects involved. But it just, to me, it's got the wrong, what do you call it? It's got the wrong kind of focus now, just to get it done as quickly as possible in 14-hour days.
Yeah, I've heard VFX in particular can be very brutal.
God, yeah,
with just the scale and the volume that they're being asked for. And
most people don't realize that it's like an open-ended thing. I mean, if somebody wants you to do a visual effect, you don't really know how it's going to turn out until you do it. And then it's a matter of trying something, and that doesn't quite work, and you manipulate it and coax it and move it this way and that way, and that's a huge amount of work to do that. And that's, talk about problem solving. I mean, that's enormous. And then sometimes, like Cameron, they even design and make new stuff. Right,
yeah, I heard that's why the second Avatar took so long to come out, because they were inventing the technology.
Yeah. I mean, when they did, what was the one that Cameron did about underwater?
The second Avatar?
The Abyss. No, The Abyss.
Oh, The Abyss?
Yeah, which was way back. But they built a tank in Malta that was 60 feet deep with the sets in the bottom of it. I mean, that, talk about spending money,
wow.
But that's what they needed to get the effects they wanted, I guess. So, it's amazing what can be done, but hopefully we still need the stories to tell.
Absolutely. And I think the story for sure is golden. Like, even for me, the movies that stick with the most, maybe this is just my personal taste, but are the ones that can connect to you on a human level. Yeah. Like, I think that's what you were commenting on when you said before that you didn't like any of the student entries because they were just probably very excited about these new visual effects and this new technology. Do you think in modern films, with streaming services and everything like that, does the grandioseness of it all get in the way and muddle everything down?
It can. I think it can. And I guess, thinking about what you just said, maybe it's the fault of the people that teach these people that they let them get away with that rather than say, tell a story. Mm-hmm. And I did a judging a few years ago for the Hamilton Film Festival, where they did a 24-hour movie making thing, where they were these. I think we had 6 or 8 teams of guys, some students and some semi-professionals, and they were given sort of 24 hours to make a movie, right from the scratch. They had to write it, shoot it. They were given one effect that they could use, be it smoke, water, whatever they wanted. They had 2 or 3 sets on a stage that they could use, one or other of them, and they had to get the whole film finished within 24 hours. And that meant most of them were trying to tell a story, which you can do. And I can't understand why some of these students that probably have a semester to do a movie, they can't do it. They just rely upon effects and digital stuff to do that. And it's just not right.
That seems to be a common theme in art. When you have parameters and you have certain conditions you have to work within, people almost... It's almost the paralysis of having so many options that makes people not be able to perform.
Well, then they should bring it down to the level of, say, do a 10, 15, 20-minute movie with a story. I don't care what effects are in it, but I want a story. I'm not going to judge you for how good the effects are, but if you got a beginning, a middle, and an end of a story, and that's all you need. And it could be just as good a movie if it's 3 or 4 people talking in a room rather than somebody dressed up as a monster leaping around. To me that was just pointless.
And I think the rise of internet content over the last 10 years, whether it be short form or long form, is a testament to that, because people can make stuff that will move someone with just a camera and a few people. That's all it takes. That's all it really takes.
But that one of the things that really annoys me as well is, everyone wants to be a movie maker. But one of the great things about the internet is if I've got something, if I want to do something and I don't know how to do it, I can look it up on YouTube. There's going to be a million videos of how to do it. Far too many of them have 2 things that really piss me off. One is that they continually are chatting about themselves and explaining the shit out of things which they don't need to do. I'm there to learn how to do something. Don't tell me that your history and how many kids you got or whatever like that. I mean, that to me is, they should script it and not just say, I'll sit down and do a thing about this. And the other thing is, which annoys me no end, is that they insist upon putting themselves in it. Like there'll be a little picture, there'll be a little bit of them in the bottom left-hand or right-hand corner of them talking to you, telling you what they're doing.
You mean for a tutorial for like a computer software or something?
Anything like that. I mean, I do a lot for, because I've been doing laser engraving and things like that. And, I like to learn how do you do it on steel? How do you do it on glass? And some of them are great, but others of them, there's this face in the corner that's trying to be jokey and tell me things and I'm not interested. I don't care what they look like. All I care is them to show me how they do something working.
I was going to say, it seems like that's a common theme across your work. It's you're taking pride in the creation of it. It's the same with woodworking as it is with your VFX career, as like with, let's say, like the music videos. After one of those maybe more technical and really probably stressful shoots, did you get that same sense of pride that you do from creating something physically with your hands?
I did that music video with Michael Jackson, the Smooth Criminal one. And I mean, what an experience to work with a genius like Michael. I mean, we had pressure on us because of, they didn't want to spend too much money, and it was Michael's money, and he was the producer, and we had, these problems with producers, and it was always went back to Michael. If Michael wanted to do something, and I said to the producer, Michael wants to do it, and they say, oh, don't worry, forget about it. He'll forget about it. And Michael never forgot anything. And then he would come up to me a couple of weeks later and say, that idea that we said, in the end, he knew what I was going to say. I'd say, talk to, what's his name? And then he would go and talk to his manager, who would talk to the producer, and the producer would come to me and say, remember that idea that Michael had? We should do something about that.
Well, I guess when you're paying for the whole production, you have that say.
Exactly. But just to work on something like that, we had 46 dancers. This year's the 35th anniversary, I think, because I just did an interview for somebody about it. I mean, we had 46 dancers, and we rehearsed them for 4 weeks continuously, 8-hour days. And 3 days before the shoot, Michael came in, because we rehearsed the dancers without Michael. He would come in occasionally, talk to the choreographer, and then they would go and do his thing. He would go and do his thing. He came in 3 days before shooting to rehearse with the 46 dancers, and it was perfect. And it wasn't going to be seen unless it was perfect. But then, talking about the exuberance and everything else of 46 people working with Michael Jackson and all the crew. I had 5 cameras at one time shooting, plus 5 cameras doing a documentary at the same time. And each day at lunchtime we would go and watch the dailies from the day before. Everybody, there'd be 100 people in the theatre, all hooting and hollering when they would see themselves, dancing, and Michael would be sitting next to me, and sometimes after that he'd say, I could do better than that. And we would reshoot it.
Wow.
And that's what Michael could do.
I guess you don't get to the kind of a position without being a bit of a perfectionist.
Oh, totally. He was very much, and admitted it, a bit like Charlie Chaplin, who had the reputation for doing things over and over again, because he always felt it. Not until he saw something could he realize how he could do it better. And Michael would I'm sure he would have, if he'd had his way, been an excellent, and if he'd lived long enough, been an excellent film person, director.
Right, because the sequence you helped out in was part of a broader movie.
Yeah.
That
it didn't start off like that.
No.
Originally, it started off, when they first approached me to do it, it was like a 15-minute music video, which is what he'd done before with Thriller and stuff like that. But then once we got to talking, there was just so much that he wanted to do in my part of it, which was this Smooth Criminal part, that it was never going to be 15 minutes. And we got to get writers in to write a complete script with the kids in it, and Mr. Big, all that kind of thing. And then they decided, in their wisdom, whoever it was, to make it into a full-length movie by adding other pieces of Michael. And, and then they decided not to release it theatrically in the United States. It was a big success all over the world, but they, for some, I think, political reason, they didn't want to release it as a movie in the States.
What was going on then? That
story was, and I know it's a rumor that other people have heard, that some of the big agencies or agents in LA wanted the first big production for Michael to be done by with their input, their company and everything else. And because Michael had done it independently, they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to release it.
So it was a holdout because he was doing his own thing.
Other than the rest of the world.
Wow.
So, that was Michael's decision as well, to do that.
And were you living in LA during that time?
Yeah. That was 2 years.
Wow.
I was working on that. Which was great, I mean, I was working in LA anyway. I'd been directing, by that time I'd been directing other music videos and commercials for 10 or 15 years. So it was a natural thing. I was actually working in LA on a commercial with a guy called Kevin Pike, who's an effects man, who had done the effects on Back to the Future.
Mm.
And Michael had called him because he wanted to turn into a car in his video.
Oh, okay.
And during the conversation that they had, one of the questions, of course, that Kevin would have asked was who's directing it, and Michael said, I don't have a director yet, mainly because the people that he would have liked to have used were all busy. I mean, most, directors in the States or in Hollywood would be booked a couple of years in advance.
Mm-hmm.
So Kevin knew me, knew that I'd done a lot of kids stuff, and also done Superman 1, 2, and 3, and suggested that he and I should meet. And Michael said, fine. We met and we got on, and we had a good relationship.
That must have been a surreal experience, meeting him at the height of his fame.
Totally.
Wow.
So, I mean, you go to the house. This is when he lived with Mum and Dad in Havenhurst, on Havenhurst Boulevard. I lived with Mum at the time. So, you get stopped at the gate, you got an appointment to see Michael Fine, they take you into the house, and they had a trophy room, which was most people's living room, except, there was a fireplace, and the rest of the room was floor to ceiling, all of Michael's and some of the brothers, I guess, awards. So and there's a big couch there and a couple of chairs. So you were sat in that room to take it all in. And I think it was 15 or 20 minutes later, Michael made an appearance coming down the stairs from his quarters upstairs and made an appearance in the room. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I knew who Michael was. And I was a fan of his, but not like, I wouldn't say I was
you
crazy.
Knew of him. He was on the radio.
Yeah, I mean, great music. It was great music.
Yeah.
I loved him, and I mean, I loved the videos that he'd done. So when I was approached by Kevin and said, "Do you want to go and meet him?" I said, "Of course I do." I mean, just to meet him, even if I hadn't got the job, would have been wonderful.
Wow.
But we got on well, and I threw out a couple of ideas to him. As one of them was because he wanted to be this like 20s, 30s, 40s gangster. And I said, we should look at some movies of the era. And I showed him The Third Man, which he loved, that kind of look that was in The Third Man with the shadows and the darkness and, the film noir look to it. And he thought it was wonderful. So we did it like that. If you look at the movie, I watched the video, some of it the other day, and so much we stole from The Third Man as far as the setups. We had the offset camera, and there's a scene where Orson Welles hides in the sewers, and we had Michael go down and had his hands coming out through the grill like they did in The Third Man. So we stole a lot of that, but it worked for the video.
And what was I'm just curious, what was LA like at that time? Because it's now very different. The movie industry is more dispersed with just everything being able to be done from basically anywhere.
Yeah.
What was it like being in like what is now known as kind of the heyday of Hollywood, and when everything was really there, everything was really around that area?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'd worked quite a bit in LA because I worked for a production company there that I did commercials for, although I didn't do many commercials in LA, mostly in other parts of the US or Canada. But where we shot Michael Jackson's video was studios, Culver City Studios, which was where they had made The Wizard of Oz. So, to be in that kind of situation was still like making movies the old way.
Yeah.
Like when I started in movies, and I first worked at Pinewood Studios in England, and that was a movie studio in every sense of the word. You could go in there, and other than if you needed a location, and a lot of those were already built there, but you could make a movie there without leaving the studio, because they had a department that did woodwork. They had a department that did plaster work. They had a drapery department. They had a props department that had millions of props in it. I mean, so there was a stores department. I could go and order something and they would get it in for me. So an engineering department. So everything was under that one roof. But then, unfortunately, like most of the studios, they went what we call four-wall. So you went and rented the studio, but there was nothing in it other than the space. And then you had to, you had to move your own. There was even an effects department at Pinewood when I first worked there.
It just financially made more sense to do it that way? Was that why?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Probably it was they could save money.
Yeah, for sure.
But I don't think it saved money, to be honest. I mean, now, anywhere, and in Toronto, it was anywhere there was a space they could rent. We call that a studio, It wasn't a studio. I mean, not like I remember studios. And that was what Hollywood was like.
Right. When you think of movie making, it was like that.
Yeah, because that was what, somewhere like Pinewood, that was what it was fashioned after, the MGM. I mean, I worked at MGM Studios in England before it got shut down. And that was a proper studio as well. I mean, there was Elstree Studios where they did Star Wars. I mean, I worked there. That was an amazing studio as well. Again, dedicated to making movies and not a four-wall studio. They're all four-wall studios now, which is a great pity because you got used to working with a group of people and they would be, I mean, I don't know how many times I got helped out of the shit at Pinewood Studios because I was part of the studio setup after a few months of working there because you have to go and talk to all these people and they would help you. If they thought you were on the wrong track, they would tell you.
Do you think that has to do with movie studios becoming more commercialized and leaning more towards a profit?
Well, as I say, they got away from being creative people making them or owning the studios, like the mayors and the Warner Brothers, and got to be accountants and lawyers, and that was all they were looking at was the bottom line. And, why do you need to keep 400 or 500 people employed if there's nobody working in the studio? I guess it makes a perfect sense, but if the studio's always busy, it doesn't make perfect sense.
I think that's partially what makes the age of the internet so exciting because it allows anyone to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the aspect that you described where everyone is in the same building with all these expertise, and if you have an issue, you can turn to someone, that is lost. That is lost for the readily available video from the internet.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Colin, we're coming close to the end, but before we go, I want to have a closing remark from you. Even though the movie business has changed so much from when you first got into it, what would your parting words be for someone who wants to get into it? So let's say that was my aspiration. I wanted to go, say, let's be like a VFX artist or work on a movie set or do that kind of stuff. What is the angle someone should take to do that these days?
I think I can only go on my own experience, and that is it isn't easy. And don't give up, because I never gave up. My brother-in-law thought I was crazy, that I shouldn't be doing it, and that I should go and get a real job. This is the same brother-in-law that now unfortunately passed away, but ended up with four of his sons and one of his daughters working in special effects, and 2 of them have Academy Awards because I was in the business, and that's how they got into it. So I was determined that I was not going to give up, even when I was, as I said, this huge thing. You can't get a job unless you're in the union, and you can't get in the union unless you got a job. I finally worked it out, how I could get in. It took me 3 years to do that, but I didn't give up. And when I got in and was able to work with people that were much better than I was, and learn from them. So don't think you know it just because you've been to film school or university or something, because you don't. You don't know how to make a movie unless you've been making a movie. Yeah. So, I mean, that's so many people say, how do I get into it? Well, get into it. I mean, you have to do your research, go and talk to people, offer to do this, offer to do that, and whatever you need to do to get a foot in the door. Because if you're good enough, and if people like you, and that doesn't mean to say that you got to kiss ass, but if you are, I mean, the best assistant to, when I was working in a business, if somebody wanted to be an assistant to me, the best thing they could do was to pretty much read my mind and know if I was doing something, that if I put my hand down, they would put the tool or piece of equipment that I wanted in my hand because they'd been watching me do it, and they could understand what I needed. And I think, I mean, yeah, don't give up. I mean, I think I lived in North London in a working class family. Nobody in the movie business or any kind of entertainment business. And my father worked for the local government. My mother worked in a factory, and my sister worked at a company that was selling kids' clothing. So I had no introduction to the movie business other than what was up in my head and what I had seen in the movies itself. And I said, hey, I'm going to do that. And I was, when I was leaving secondary school, we had these vocational counselors. They said to me, you should either become a typewriter engineer. Think of that one, because nobody uses typewriter anymore.
That would have been a bad career path to take.
And the other one was be a telephone engineer, which again was a bad one to have taken.
Like an operator?
No, to repair telephone
equipment.
Okay. And that time it was all ratchets and it was all mechanical.
Yeah.
So like the typewriters, now it's all digital. So, not that I would have taken that course because I didn't want to do it, but I just was determined. And I think, talk to people that are in the business. That's maybe how you get started, and say, how do I get, if I was working in Toronto still and some student or some kid wanted to come and talk to me and say, how do I get in the business? I could say, be determined to do it. And sometimes maybe offer them a position or come and help us do it. That's how my nephew started. I mean, okay, they were lucky enough that I was in the business already. Yeah. But once they decided, Chris would come, and Chris has done 14 Bond movies now and got an Academy Award. He came and helped me, or came to observe, on the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So he got a taste of it, and he was lucky enough to know me. And I said, I wasn't paying him, but come along. And,
so he saw it was possible. He saw the way you did it.
Well, he saw the way. No, and he knew by example that I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know how I was going to get into it even, but I knew I wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like very sort of not a direct way of saying, well, just get into it, but that is,
get your feet wet. You got to try something.
You got to be, there's no good giving up. Mm-hmm. Even if I was working somewhere else when I was just trying to make a living because I was trying to get in the business, I was still trying to get in the business. I would never give up. No. And I would say, don't give up.
Well, I think that's a very powerful message, Colin, and I appreciate your time. I thank you for coming on, and I had a great time here, and I'd hopefully love to have you back on again sometime in the future. You
wanted Oscar, didn't you?
Oh!
I forget Oscar.
Sure, why not? Yeah. Let's pull it out. Yeah. I didn't realize you had it here with you.
Oh, I bought it because the other guys, and Brian said you might like to see it too.
No way.
I like it because the bag you can do a reveal. Very dramatic.
Drum roll.
You ready?
Wow. And what was it like getting that?
Oh, amazing. Well, there was 5 of us got it. Huh? And I got the British one and the American one. And it was a year that Steve Martin gave it to us.
Wow.
And I met John Wayne and a bunch of other actors, and incredible.
That's incredible.
Night. Wow. You don't really remember much of it.
It's probably just like a blur.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you feel it. It's so heavy.
Oh. Didn't expect it to be like that. That's crazy.
And yet, that's not something that I had probably thought I would ever get.
No, I don't think most people will set out.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, usually if you're trying to get one, you don't get one.
Right. You have to actually love and be passionate about it. And that's where what you were talking about before, you can't give up attitude comes from.
Absolutely.
'Cause if you don't love what you're doing, you will give up.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was so lucky with the crew that we had on Superman, and Richard Donner, the director, and then Richard Lester on the other movies were great to work for. And those were still Pinewood days when you had the opportunity to work with people that knew what they were doing in various departments.